All right, here we go. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Once again, I'm Blake Burman, joined today by a great panel. Kurt Bardella is a Democratic strategist and former House GOP Oversight Committee advisor. Denise Gitsham is a Republican strategist and former aide to President George W. Bush. Kevin Walling is a Democratic strategist and former Biden campaign surrogate. And Charlie Dents, as you might know, former Republican congressman from the state of Pennsylvania. But we begin today with President Biden, who spent the day addressing the United Nations General Assembly. He emphasized the need for more international cooperation and asked the world to stand with Ukraine. But consider this headline right now coming out of the Big Apple. It comes from the New York Times, an opinion piece highlighting how progressives are fundraising at a slow and worrying pace. The author, Michelle Goldberg, poses the question, where has all the left-wing money gone? She writes, quote, yet if liberal lassitude is understandable, it's also alarming because we're going to have to fend off Trump once again. And even if some pullback is cyclical, some seems to be rooted in a more enduring malaise. Malaise, is that what it is, Kurt? You worried?
I'm not worried. Maybe I'm one of the few Democrats who doesn't worry and wet the bed every time that something doesn't go the way everyone thinks it should, because that seems to be something Democrats really like to do. It's September of 2023. Joe Biden is not in a contested primary. There is no reason necessarily to be having money flowing to super PACs and dark groups the way that you would normally have in an off-year election or the actual real campaign that we're going to have in 24. By the time it's all said and done, more money is going to be spent than God, just like every election cycle that we have. Every side, Democrats and Republicans, are going to be fully funded, and it's just going to be an all-out money war.
But Kevin, here's the head of the voter movement Voter Project talking about all this. Quote, in the 2019-2020 election cycle, and to some extent in 21-22, donors gave like our lives depended on it. This has not yet happened in 23-24. As a result, progressive electoral groups are struggling financially, and the problem appears to be getting worse.
Well, Blake, to that quote that you just read, we were running against an incumbent Republican in terms of Donald Trump, who was great for both sides in terms of fundraising, either against him and for him. But to Kurt's point, you know, I'm not winning the bet either. I look at the numbers through Q2, which is the end of June, and the DNC, DLCC, DCCC, the DSCC, all of our kind of
Democratic
Senate, House committees responsible for electing Democrats have outraised the Republican counterparts by $27 million in the first 6 months of the year. So I think there's going to be plenty of money to go around, but Democrats are in good shape.
But I heard you mention, and it talks about it in there, Donald Trump. If you need Donald Trump, doesn't that sort of show that there's a malaise there?
Factor, certainly. But, you know, you're going to have a party committee staying behind an incumbent president. There's a lot of power behind running an incumbent president. He was on Broadway just last night in New York on the sidelines of the UN, raising money with the stars of Broadway. We'll have plenty of money. Former
Republican congressman, the Democrats here say no worries.
Well, I do think at the end of the day, both sides are going to be very well capitalized. They'll have plenty of money. But I think it's pretty clear that there is a lack of enthusiasm for Joe Biden among a lot of Democrats. It's an age issue. Many think he's too old. He's supposed to be the bridge to the next generation of Democratic leadership.
Right.
They wanted him to transition. Well, he needs to transit, and he hasn't done that. And so that's, I think, a fundamental problem that he is just not exciting. Now, Donald Trump excites Democrats, and that'll drive the money, but it's not going to be because they're all thrilled with Joe Biden.
Yeah, and on that point, this reminds me of what happened to CNN when Donald Trump left office. They were suddenly going into bankruptcy. Nobody was watching because they had nothing to rail against. So I think in order for progressives and Democrats to really capture hearts and minds, they have to have a platform that is separate from who they're railing against and give Americans something they're railing for.
All right, so you mentioned Joe Biden, the president, at Broadway last night. Here's what he said. He was given a fundraiser speech. At one point, quote, and you may have noticed a lot of people seem focused on my age. Well, I get it. Believe me, I know better than anyone. He goes on to say, I've never been more optimistic about our country's future in the 800 years I've served. Funny, it's a good line. We're all laughing here, smirking. But is that the way, Kevin, to get at it and to sort of bring Democrats and say, you know what, open up the checkbook, let's go?
Yeah, I think so. And listen, you know, that remark was met by a loud applause and laughter in the theater in New York. And I think the president kind of turning the tables on that age narrative. Of course, he's only 3 years older than his likely Republican nominee. It might be the way to do it.
I don't know. I think that this is where we might have to disagree, because doubling down on your weakest point doesn't necessarily help move the needle in your favor. I think the more he talks about age, the more he brings attention to it, the more you're starting to see a deflection from folks thinking that he's not going to make it through his next 4 years if he wins the White House.
Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.